Greetings, everyone, and welcome to God Save the King. I am your host, Tim Kais. I want to thank you for joining me on the Truth Be Told Radio Network, where you can hear my show every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And of course, as soon as I go live there, I got to sneeze. So go figure. Let's see if I can keep from not sneezing here. I think I'm going to be okay. Also, for those of you, here's a little, we got to jump like right into the caveats and provisos here. If you happen to be watching on YouTube right now, you can see me and you can see that my eyes are really red. That is simply allergies. So those of you that might actually be watching this as opposed to just listening to it on the radio, hey, you get to look at my pretty face, but yeah, my eyes are kind of red just from allergies. So sorry about that. I know it looks a little bit funky, but there it is. Life is life. We all deal with things like this. Also, another quick little disclaimer here is that I'm having some issues with my power here at my house. And therefore, there is some static interference. There's some interference with the signal right now. I hope it's not coming through on the program right now. You might be able to hear it in the background. I hope not, because it's definitely disturbing me. I hope it's not disturbing you. But unfortunately, this is I have a background in audio. And this is a thing called dirty power. And dirty power is in the building that you are working in. And it can oftentimes be very difficult to get rid of dirty power because it's the building. It's the building. The circuitry in the building was not put together right. And therefore it picks up interference, it picks up radio interference. And then it comes through your circuitry that your gear is plugged into. So of course I've got a computer, system and audio system hooked up here with, an audio interface and the computer itself and, studio monitors and things like that, because I'm an audio geek. But unfortunately, and I've got all the different filters and protectors on my gear here to try to prevent this from happening. But there it is. Sometimes nonetheless, you get this, coming through on the audio signal. So I hope you're not hearing that. Anyway, let's get on with things. Welcome to God Save the King. As I said, I am Tim Kais. I am your host. I am the creator and president of God Save the King. And what God Save the King is, for those of you that may not heard my show before, is God Save the King is my ongoing over 35-year research project into what the nativity really would have looked like. And that is because the traditional nativity story that we are all used to hearing has actually, unfortunately, kind of taken on a life of its own and has become this very particular story that is told pretty much the same way every time we hear it. At a church, Christmas pageant or nativity play or something like that, the same basic story is told over and over and over again every year. And sadly, like I said, because it's kind of taken on a life of its own, unfortunately, a lot of it's really not all that accurate. There are certain portions of the nativity story that unfortunately have been the victims of translational errors. They've been the victims of tradition, victims of the adult version of the children's telephone game, where it just keeps getting repeated over and over. And then each time it gets repeated, it gets embellished a little bit, and the embellishment is not correct, but then it sticks. And the end result is you've got a story that actually isn't really all that accurate. So that is really what God Save the King is all about, is about retelling the nativity story the way it really would have happened, and then also to put it in its historical context. Because when you put it in its historical context, it takes on a relevancy that it just almost kind of doesn't have when in just the traditional version. And one of the jokes, me and my staff and others that have been around me for a while, one of our favorite jokes is that, this is like Game of Thrones, and it really is like Game of Thrones. That's why it's called God Save the King, is because God Save the King is a pun poking at which king are we really talking about here. Are we talking about the Roman appointed client king of Judea, Herod the Great? Are we talking about Augustus Caesar? Or are we talking about Phraates the Fourth of Parthia? All who play a role in the story. But of course, what we're really talking about is the Davidic king, the true born Davidic king of the Jews, Jesus of Nazareth. So it really is a political thriller if you understand what's going on. Now, I've said all that, and you know what? That's not what we're going to talk about today. I am going to pull the rug out from under you, throw you a curveball, and change what I want to talk about today. And that is because I've just really been impressed by the Holy Spirit, frankly, to talk about something different today. So that's what I want to do. And if you're, like I said, you're watching this on YouTube or you're watching it on Facebook Live that I'm broadcasting right now, you can see that the title says Pattern Recognition in the Prophetic Process, Part 1. And I'll tell you right up front, this may wind up being a multi-part series because I do want to back up, as my manner is. I want to back up several steps and get a running start at this. So I do want to lay the foundation for what it is I'm going to talk about today and possibly over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Because what do I mean by pattern recognition in the prophetic process? What is that? Well, let me tell you. Let me tell you where we are going today, next week, the week after that. Let me tell you the point of what I'm driving at here. So, about 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago, actually, I was the adult Bible study teacher at a church I belonged to. And I had developed the reputation of being kind of like a Bible answer man kind of dude, right? That you could come to me and ask me any bizarro Bible question and then I would quote unquote know the answer. Well, I can guarantee you I don't know the answer to every question. And usually that meant more like a Bible trivia question, who did this or who said that, or, what secret code is hidden in, which verse, or how do you understand biblical astronomy and all this, a good friend of mine at the church came up with the terminology kook, Kook, that we were kooks, which meant a keeper of odd knowledge, right? And that's very definitely true. But at any rate, like I said, I'm the adult Bible study teacher. I developed a reputation as kind of like a Bible answer man kind of guy. And we were having a church picnic one Sunday. And one of the couples at the church walked up to me and asked if they could sit down and said, "Do you mind if we ask you a Bible question?" And of course, I said, "Of course, yeah. What do you got?" And they asked me this question. They said, "When God gives you a promise, does that mean it is going to happen no matter what?" And this is very interesting because the members of that church were all very interested in that question at that time. And for many of us, we had never really been introduced to what I am calling the prophetic process until that time. So, what do I mean? What did they mean? And what do I mean by the prophetic process? And what is the answer to that question? When God gives you a quote unquote prophetic promise, does that mean it's going to happen no matter what? So let's describe that scenario a little bit, that paradigm, that dynamic, and see where we get. Okay. So what they're talking about, what my friends were asking about, and what I'm talking about, we are going to label the prophetic process. And what the prophetic process is in the Bible is when there's multiple stories. They're all through the Bible. There are multiple stories in the Bible of a man or woman receiving a promise from God about something that is going to happen to them in the future. And then time goes by, weeks, months, or frankly, it's usually years go by. And then eventually that promise, that prophetic promise, actually does happen. And so the question that my friends asked is, if and when this happens to you, to me, to believers today, if and when we receive a prophetic promise, either via a prophetic word or a vision or a dream or something like that, when we receive a promise, their question was, is it going to happen no matter what? Okay, now, at the time, I instinctively knew that the answer to that question was no. No, of course, it does not mean it's going to happen no matter what. And the key phrase there is the no matter what. No matter what is a little too broad of a series or combination of conditions that means God would just simply have to override every imaginable condition and make it happen no matter what. So instinctively, I knew that the answer to that question was no. But I also knew at that time that I really didn't know how to explain how I knew that. Like I said, I knew instinctively that the answer was no, but I couldn't explain beyond that. And frankly, it's because this is something you need to experience. Yes, you can learn a lot from studying the Bible, and that's what we are going to talk about today. Is we are going to look at pattern recognition concerning the prophetic promise in the Bible. We're going to look at numerous individuals that went through this in the Bible and have very prominent stories that we all know. Frankly, most of us know these stories quite well, right? So whether it's Abraham or Joseph or Moses or David, those are probably the four big ones that I'm going to go to over and over and over again. But it does involve other Bible characters as well that went through the same process. And what I want to do is I want to look for what I'm calling pattern recognition, because at the end of the day, what this is that when these men and women received a promise from God, that promise was actually an invitation. And that was an invitation into a process, into a prophetic process that we have to go through, that then transforms us into the person that can receive that promise. So, in a nutshell, that's a big part of why the answer to the specific question, does that mean it's going to happen, quote unquote, no matter what? The answer to that is a resounding no. Okay. No, it doesn't mean that. Now, it could mean that. I'm not saying that it could not mean that. There is always the possibility that God, in his sovereignty, will override every external circumstance and make it happen no matter what. That is possible. But that doesn't mean that that is normal and that that is the pattern. See, and this is what I'm talking about here is pattern recognition. I want to look at these stories and look for these repeating patterns to help us understand not only what happened to these men and women, but frankly, what is happening to us. Because I know me, for example, I have received what I believe are prophetic promises that God spoke to me either through a prophetic word or in a vision or in a dream and showed me something or some things, could be more than one, that are going to happen in my life. But I now recognize that this was an invitation into a journey. Now, I try not to use that word. And the reason I try not to use that word is because it's just trite. It's trite and it's overused, but it is accurate. So I will use it from time to time, that we are invited into this journey, and that the journey in many ways is the destination. And I'm going to try to not say that too, because that is trite. That is a prepackaged pat answer that we get handed a lot. And it can be really unsatisfactory and frankly can be used to dismiss someone who is asking, a really important question, which is, how do I navigate this journey, right? See, now there, the words work together extremely well. How do I navigate this process? How do I navigate this journey? Because great, big, huge, enormous portions of this journey and of this process happen without complete information. we get partial information, and then we are required to walk out on it and to move forward and to navigate this process without complete information. And that's why it can be very interesting. That's also why in the Bible, the symbolism that is typically attached to this is, number one, is the wilderness, right? When the nation of Israel went into the wilderness, when Abraham was called out of Ur of the Chaldees into a land he did not know, right? Now, it doesn't say explicitly that he went into the wilderness, but he was called into a land that he did not know, right? And that is the point. When we are invited into this process, when we are invited onto this journey, we are invited to go someplace we do not recognize. That is the point of the symbolism of the wilderness, right? Another symbolism that is frequently used is prison. Okay, this is the case in the story of Joseph. It's also the case, we also see other men that were put in prison or captivity for that matter, right? Prison or captivity or slavery can also function exactly the same as wilderness because it's constraining, it's restraining, it's I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know where I'm going, I can't see what's right in front of me. My only option is to trust the leading of the Holy Spirit, who is going to lead me moment by moment, step by step and day by day through this process, right? So this is what we're talking about. This is what I mean by the prophetic process. Some of these really amazing stories in Scripture of some of the great heroes of faith, right? And we're going to come back to 4 or 5 of them over and over and over again. Abraham, Joseph, Moses, David, and then the children of Israel as a group. But that doesn't mean these are the only ones, not by a long shot. Now, as I said, what I do want to do here is I want to back up and get a running start. I really want to lay the foundation for this. Now, I am going to move pretty quickly through some foundational information so that we don't spend forever on the background. But I am also going to say this, and maybe I will do this in a future series, is that as I blow through this background information, pretty much everything I'm talking about deserves to be unpacked on its own merit. Like the very first thing I'm going to mention here, we could easily spend an entire hour talking about the very first thing I'm going to mention out of the gate. We could spend a lot of time here. So just, if you're wondering about, Tim, what does that mean? You mentioned this thing. It sounds really interesting, really provocative. It sounds like it's really relevant, but I don't know what you're talking about. Please feel free to send me an email. You can email me at contact.godsavetheking@gmail.com. That's contact.godsavetheking@gmail.com. And I will do my best to answer that question. I can't guarantee I'm going to get to it immediately, and I can't guarantee that I'm going to write a dissertation to answer that question, because questions in this realm tend to be pretty involved. But I will do my best to respond and answer that question, and potentially even answer it on air. And for that matter, if you happen to be watching right now, you can comment. You can post a comment. And if I see a comment, I'll see if I can't possibly answer that on air as well. So like I said, let's back up and get a running start, because I'm going to go some places with this that you may not be expecting. So buckle up, strap in, get ready. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. And like I said, this is part 1. Chances are very, very high this is going to go into parts 2, 3, 4, etc. Okay, so number 1, God has an eternal purpose and an ultimate intention. God's eternal purpose and ultimate intention is to create his Ezer Kenegdo. Now, what the heck does that mean? So those of you that have a little bit of Bible knowledge, you're aware that when God created a partner for Adam, that word or phrase that is usually translated helper or companion or helpmeet in the King James is the Hebrew phrase ezer kenegdo. Ezer kenegdo. And if you consult a concordance or a Bible dictionary or a bunch of Hebrew scholars, they're going to tell you that this is one of the most ridiculously difficult phrases to translate that there is in the Bible, period. Ezer kenegdo, or sometimes we shorten it and we just say ezer, right? But what God was doing in that circumstance with Adam and Eve was he was creating the perfect counterpart to Adam, the perfect counterpart, the perfect companion. The word helper just does not do it justice. At other places in the Bible, this same phrase is used of, frankly, of a savior figure, right? That this is someone who contributes so significantly to you as your partner that they, in effect, save you. Okay, now I don't want to go there. That's a rabbit trail, but the point being is that this is a very significant word. And part of what God is doing when he creates the Ezer Kenegdo for Adam by creating Eve, he is using Adam and Eve as a model for his own personal ultimate purpose and eternal intention, or eternal purpose and ultimate intention, which is to create a partner for himself. Because the eternal Godhead, they experience perfect love, perfect blessing, perfect communion within the Godhead, but love is other-minded. See, and this is why this is going to get deep really fast, and why I could spend hours and hours and hours talking about this. Love is other-minded. It is other-centered. I love someone else. I bestow love upon another person. And that's why the Godhead, the eternal Godhead, is so significant, is because the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit experienced perfect love and perfect communion within the Godhead. But perfect love also drove them, for lack of a better word, to create. They needed to create someone, something outside of the Godhead with whom to share their love. Love requires it. Love required God to create. Well, who or what did he create? Well, he created the material universe, yes, the material creation, but he also set about to create his perfect companion, his Ezer Kenegdo. That's the reason we have that model in scripture of Adam and Eve, and why it's called an Ezer Kenegdo is because this is what God's intention and purpose is to create the perfect companion for himself. Now think about it for a minute. This perfect companion, and we have this example all through Genesis 1 where God creates all of these binary pairs. Okay, this is a significant way. Now here we go. This is pattern recognition, because God operates in patterns for a reason, is because he operates in patterns so that we can recognize the pattern, so that we can anticipate what may happen. And therefore, that, frankly, it builds faith. That you may not know exactly what is going to happen, but because you recognize that God operates in patterns, you can anticipate at least a little bit what is going on and what he may do based upon pattern recognition. So in Genesis chapter 1, God creates in binary pairs. And by a binary pair, what I mean here is that these are opposites, but they are also the perfect complement and the perfect companion to one another. So God begins by creating the heavens and the earth. Okay, so there you have it. You've got a binary pair, heavens and earth. They are opposites, but they are also perfect complements. And heavens can mean the earth's atmosphere, and then the earth, right? Heavens and earth, right? Heavens can also mean outer space, and then the earth, right? And heavens can also mean the spirit realm and the material realm. So in each one of these cases, you have an opposite and a complement going on at the same time. Okay, so God created the heavens and the earth. Then we are told that, he creates dry land and water, and he separates the land from the water. So those are opposites and complements, right? We are told that, and he goes through this whole list. I won't go through the whole list, but just read Genesis chapter 1 and look at the binary pairs that God creates. And then, of course, you get down to the end, and he creates male and female, right? And he creates male and female in his image. And then, of course, when you get into Genesis 2, you've got the record of that he opens up Adam's side, he takes out a rib, and he creates Adam's Azer from within Adam, right? So male and female are a binary pair. And of course, this is why, and I don't want to go there, I don't want to stir this pot right now, but I'm going to stir it a little bit, which is that is why, in our culture right now, we've got this big fight over certain people saying, well, I'm non-binary. Well, sorry, you are binary. You're one or the other. That is all that exists in this creation, is male or female. You are one or the other. You are not non-binary. And what's that's going to get to, which we're going to get into either later in this program or in a later session, is we're going to talk about part of this prophetic journey, unfortunately, is the trap that we all fall into, which is that, see, God created us in his image. So in many ways, we are like God. In many, many ways, we are like God. And then when God gave Adam and Eve the rules for life, he only gave them 2 rules. And he said, you can eat of any tree of the garden, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you don't eat of that. And to the best of our knowledge, what that means is that the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that was a poetic way of God saying, look, you can do whatever you want, except you don't get to decide what's good and evil. That's me. I alone decide what's good and evil. And as you walk with me, moment by moment, step by step, and day by day, I will teach you good from evil, but you don't get to decide. And see, that, of course, is where Adam and Eve screwed up, is that they immediately dove into, well, we're like God. See, and that was the enemy's plot and plan and ploy and temptation was, the serpent said, God knows that in the day you eat thereof, you will be like him, knowing good and evil, right? So he tempted Adam and Eve, tempted the human race, that we can know good from evil on our own and therefore operate independently of God. And that is a huge part of this story, and a huge part of the prophetic process is the temptation to navigate our lives independent of God, okay? But backing up, God's eternal purpose and ultimate intention was to create his perfect companion, his Azer Kenegdo, an opposite but also the perfect counterpart. So God is invisible, we are visible. God is immaterial, we are material. God is celestial, we are terrestrial, right? Okay. And this is all, like I said, and you've got all these binary pairs in Genesis chapter 1 that, here you go, pattern recognition. They exist in a pattern so that we can go, aha, look, I can see what he's doing there. He is creating a pattern that we can follow, right? And of course, the ultimate pattern that he is following, the ultimate model, is he's created humanity, male and female, and to exist in this thing called marriage that is a model of our relationship to him. Marriage is the best model we have in the material realm of the relationship between God and humanity. We are his Azer Kenegdo. Okay, we are his bride, in effect, right? See, and that language is all through Scripture as well. Now, I really don't intend this to be a teaching on the bridal metaphor, but it's there. All right. It is there, right? And now, right along with this, so God's eternal purpose and ultimate intention is to create his perfect companion. Also, his eternal purpose and ultimate intention is to indwell his creation and thereby live in this vital union with his creation. We are created, we were created, and we are created to live exclusively within this very close, intimate, vital relationship with God. If we get separated from that, see, and that's the point, if that relationship gets broken, we are in a world of hurt. Okay, because we are not designed to function independently of God. We are designed to function in radical dependency on God, in this intimate, very close-knit, very dependent, okay, relationship with God. So his intention, create his perfect counterpart, and then to indwell and live in this really tight relationship. And then therefore, see, we are supposed to live from this relationship, from the indwelling divine life, right? And that's what we read in Genesis. Now, remember that Genesis is almost mythic in its character and in its brevity. I really find it an extraordinarily remarkable book, period, and especially the first 3 chapters. The first 3 chapters are enormous, and yet they're only 3 chapters. So it has this amazing mythological character, and I'm not saying that because I don't believe it's true. I do believe it's true. I'm saying it because I'm talking about how enormous the story, the depth of the story here is, and how enormous what is going on is, and yet it is, we get it in these brief little snippets. God created man in his image. Oh, 1 sentence. Oh my God, but the implications of that are enormous, right? Like I said in a moment ago, the serpent tempted Adam and Eve. Oh, God doesn't want you to eat of that tree because he knows that in the day you eat thereof, you will be like him, knowing good and evil. Man, 1 sentence and kaboom, it's just absolutely enormous what he is talking about here. Okay, so the book of Genesis, especially the first 3 to 4 chapters, are mythic in their capacity, and yet they are brief. They are very, very, very brief, but mythic in their capacity for what they are communicating. So once again, create his perfect companion, to live in a vital union, and then that we are designed to live from that vital union and that radical dependency. And that's when it says, in the book of Genesis, that Adam walked with God. There it is. One little, very short, simple phrase. Adam walked with God. That's it. That's all contained in that statement, right? Now, I already covered this, but let's go there again just for a second. What God communicated to humanity, to Adam and Eve, to mankind, was he said, okay, in order to do this, there's 2 rules. There's really only 2 rules. And he used figurative language, he used poetic language, right? And that's important because, see, poetry is used to communicate mythic concepts, these radically enormous concepts that have to be contained in just a few sentences. That's why it's in poetic language. You may freely eat of any tree of the garden. So in other words, you can do whatever you want. Humanity is free to do whatever it wants. You are free to eat of any tree of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, do not eat of that tree. You, humanity, mankind, man and woman, Adam and Eve, you do not get to decide good and evil. God decides what's good and evil. You do not get to try to live independent of that vital relationship. If and when you do, you've got a problem. Okay, you've really, really got a problem. And like I said, that's why the temptation was what the temptation was. See, mankind is created in the image of God. We're very similar to God. We're very, very, very similar. We do have a lot of the same capacity, maybe not on the same scale, right? But we have similar capacities, the capacity to create, maybe not out of nothing, but we have the capacity to be creative and to form things, especially in the areas of, art and, music and art and innovation and invention and things like that. We are very creative. We are a creative race, and that's because we're created in the image of God, who is a creative being. But see, that's why the temptation was, see, God knows you're like him, but the implication then is, God is withholding something. He's withholding something from you. So see, so God really isn't good. He's withholding something. So you just go ahead and you operate independent of God. That's the temptation from the serpent. Okay. Now, moving forward, because like I said, we could spend hours on this. Also in Genesis, in the first 3 chapters, we are told that Adam and Eve were naked, but not ashamed. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? Because this is critical to our discussion going forward. What does it mean, naked and not ashamed? Now, remember, it's poetry. So it is mythic in its capacity to inform us of a very large, significant concept, but it's very, very brief. So naked is symbolic, it's figurative, it's poetic, and it means fully visible or fully transparent, right? Adam and Eve were naked. In other words, they could see everything about themselves and about each other. I see you, you see me. I can see everything about you. I know you. I know who you are. I know what you're like. I know who you are deeply, right? I know who you are. Who you are. That's very significant, because ultimately that's what the human experience is all about, is we want to be known. We want to know, and we want to be known for who we genuinely and authentically are. And then here's the key, and be accepted and approved and affirmed and validated and frankly celebrated for who we are. So very interesting here that it says they were naked and not ashamed. In other words, there was no negative connotation to being fully visible to themselves and to each other and to God. There was nothing to be ashamed of. There was nothing to feel bad about. There was nothing to be embarrassed. Nothing, nothing negative in being fully transparent, fully visible to God, to ourselves, and to each other. But then notice that after Adam and Eve transgressed, after they sinned, after they fell, that's the theological term, right? That they hid themselves. They knew they were naked and they hid themselves. So, in other words, they were naked and now they were ashamed. They looked at God, they looked at themselves, they looked at each other, and they went, ooh, this is not good. Now I feel really self-conscious. I don't like what I'm feeling. See, and connected to that is the fact that now they have been separated from God. And that's the key. This is a huge key to how this all works here. Forgive me here while I got to turn over here and turn a page on my notebook. Okay. Because what happens here is that, Adam and Eve, they get tempted by the serpent. The serpent says, go ahead, eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Go ahead, live independent of God. And then what do Adam and Eve do? They fall for it. They fall for it. Eve eats of the fruit. She gives to her husband. He eats, and they now fall, quote unquote. That's the theological term. They become separated from God. They are now no longer living in this vital, intimate relationship that we are designed to live in. They made the choice. We're going to live independent of you, God. See ya, bye, right? We're going to go live independent. Well, this is what that means. Sorry, this is what that means. If you choose to live independent of God, God is, for the most part, you got to be very careful when it comes to the Bible. You can never say never. You got to be really careful in it. You can never say never and put God in a box. You got to be very, very careful to never say God will never do a certain thing, because right about the time you say God won't do something, he'll do it, frankly, just to prove you wrong, right? Okay, so anyway, Adam and Eve chose to live independent of God. So, like I said, the theological term is that they fell, right? They became fallen, they became separated, they became, yeah, they separate from God. Now, those are the biblical or theological terms. If we were to use a psychological term, we would say that the human race now became dysfunctional. Now, people don't like that. They do not like that. They don't want to hear that. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second. But you would say dysfunctional, or if you just wanted to use a really generic phrase, you would say the human race is broken. All right. So theological, fallen, psychological, dysfunctional, generic, broken. The human race is fallen, dysfunctional, and broken. And if you want to challenge that, I'm going to challenge you back and say, look around. It doesn't take even critical observation. It only takes moderate observation to look around and realize that the human race is a mess. Okay, and this is the point. So now let me drive it home a little bit more, because we read in Genesis that Adam and Eve, after they ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, in other words, after they decided to live independent of God, they realized they were naked. They realized that they were exposed, that they were transparent, that they could be fully seen. There you go, fully seen by God, by themselves, and by each other, and they didn't like it. That made them really uncomfortable, because what it meant is that every wart, pimple, and flaw became visible to God, to themselves, and to each other. And see, that is a fundamental part of the human experience, is if our desire, if our deepest desire is to be known, okay, is to know and to be known, that I look at you, you look at me, we see deeply into who each other truly, genuinely, and authentically really is. And then we accept, we affirm, we validate, we authenticate, and then we love and we celebrate who that is. That's the goal. Well, what's the opposite? The opposite is, if you really see me for who I really am, you won't like it. See, I see me for who I really am, and I don't like it. So if you see me for who I really am, you won't like it, and you will abandon me. You will reject me. See, that is the human experience. So it's a fundamental component of the human experience that we are terrified of abandonment and rejection, and that, frankly, we are alone. That we are alone in this world. That we're no longer connected to God, and I have no one to rely on, because if I were to rely on them, I would have to show them who I am. They'd have to see me, but they can see me. And if I allow them to see me, then they're going to see that I am broken and dysfunctional and fallen, and they're not going to like me, and they're not going to want to have anything to do with me, and therefore they're going to reject me and abandon me and leave me alone. And here I am alone, right? Now, there's another piece of this puzzle that is, it's really important for us to understand this, which is that if we're broken, see, and what else did God tell Adam and Eve when he said, don't eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? He said, in the day thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Okay, so death. Man was not intended to die. Man was not intended to be temporal. Okay, man was intended to be eternal. God's eternal counterpart. Okay, but God said, if you try to live independent of me, there's no other option. You're going to die. You are going to die. So now, as part of the fall, as part of our dysfunction, as part of our brokenness, we are now forever imprinted with the awareness that we are going to die. And that stinks. Okay? That is no fun, because now look at, frankly, how awful the human condition is, right? We are no longer connected to God. We are not walking in that vital relationship with Him. We are naked. We are fully visible to God, to ourselves, to each other. And that if and when you see me or I see you, you're going to reject me. I'm going to reject you. I'm not going to like you. I'm not going to accept you. I'm not going to affirm you. I'm not going to validate you. You're not going to do the same for me. You're going to reject me and abandon me. So now here we are alone in the world, and I'm going to die. Well, now it's very easy to understand why lots of people walk around going, what's the point? What is the point in life? I feel empty. I feel useless. I feel hopeless. I don't know why I'm here. I don't feel like I have a purpose. I hate my life. Well, it's very understandable. That's actually very, very, very understandable, because frankly, that is the human condition without God. When we are separated from God, we are, screwed. Okay? So now you are walking around with this awareness that you are going to die, right? Well, guess what that means? That means that each of us individually, let alone corporately. So it's bad enough for the individual, but now you put us in a group. You put us in a community with other people like us, broken just like we are. You put us in a community. You put us in a state. You put us in a nation. Or globally, right? With other broken people just like us. You now have an existential crisis. Humanity lives in an existential crisis. It's awful. No wonder we have these really deep, significant questions about our existence, an existential crisis, and who am I, why am I here, and what am I supposed to do with my life? Because if we don't get answers to those questions, then it's actually very understandable why someone's life would spin out of control and become very messy and not much fun. Okay, I'm trying to be polite here and not paint too dark of a picture, but the reality of it is that without God, we're in a really, really dark place. Right now, remember, I'm headed towards pattern recognition in the prophetic process, right? But like I said, it's very important to lay this foundation, because now what's going on here is that after the fall, as we become self-conscious and self-aware, we become conscious and aware that we are broken. We become conscious and aware that everybody else is broken. We become conscious and aware that I can't fix myself and neither can anybody else. Okay? And that individually and collectively, we can't solve our own problems. Right? Now, this is fundamental to the Bible and the gospel. Okay? So anyone who has a reasonable understanding of the Judeo-Christian Bible should understand these things. But just in case this was never spelled out for you, let me spell it out for you, okay? But now what this means, and this is why this is really important, is that because of the fall, because of the dysfunction, because of the brokenness, and then now because of being self-aware, because of being self-conscious and self-aware, we are now aware individually and collectively that we are broken, that we are dysfunctional, that we cannot fix ourselves, that we are going to die, that we have an existential crisis. Well, how do we respond? How do we respond? Well, the way we respond is we engage in massive denial and massive self-deception. That's how we respond. Because why would our broken self be honest with ourselves? If I'm broken and I look in the mirror and all I see is hopelessness, why wouldn't I lie to myself? Okay, if I'm broken and I'm dysfunctional and I've got an existential crisis and I've got an identity crisis, it's an identity crisis and it's an existential crisis, right? I don't know who I am. I don't like who I am. I look at myself. I don't like myself. I believe that when other people look at me, that they don't like me, right? See, so it's an identity crisis and it's an existential crisis. And so therefore, if I look at myself in the mirror and I don't like what I see, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to lie to myself. I am going to deceive myself and tell myself that, well, hey, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay, and you're okay. We're all okay. See, we'll just all agree to agree, and we'll just all agree that we're all okay, and we will all just go through life in massive denial and deception, self-deception, and deceiving others. And then what we'll really do, oh my word, is we will systematize this. We will systematize our denial and our deception as a way of placating ourselves, right? As a way of hiding the reality that we do not want to face, which is, once again, remember, this is poetic, this is mythic, this is figurative, this is symbolic. This is why Adam and Eve made aprons of fig leaves, okay? And we'll talk about why the fig leaf at another time, because there's a reason they chose fig. I'll give you part of it. Part of the reason they chose fig leaves is because fig leaves are large. They're big. They're as big as the palm of my hand, right? They're big and they're soft and velvety to the touch when they are on the tree or as soon as you pluck it off the tree. But over time, they shrink and they become dry and scratchy, right? So when you think about it, what a marvelous poetic illustration here. They made aprons to cover their nakedness, right? That they don't want to see. See, I don't want to see this. I don't want to see the reality. I don't want to see that I'm broken. I don't want to see that I'm naked. I don't want you to see me. I don't want to see you. I don't want to see myself. I don't want God to see me. So I'm going to cover myself. I'm going to make up. I'm going to deny things, and I'm going to come up with lies about myself and about humanity, and I'm going to systematize it. So I am, in effect, making clothing, making an apron, okay, out of fig leaves, because fig leaves are, number one, they're big enough to do the job, especially if I get several of them in a group, right? They're big enough to do the job, and they're velvety to the touch. See, and the implication here is, okay, pardon being very blunt here, but here we go. They made aprons, in other words, to cover their genitals, right? Well, both male and female, you want something soft and velvety next to your genitals. You don't want something dry and scratchy, right? See, so it's the perfect metaphor. It's the perfect poetic language for what we do to protect ourselves from being visible to God, ourselves, and each other, is we create these aprons out of fig leaves. But the problem is, as soon as that fig leaf gets plucked, it's not alive anymore. It's going to die. It's going to dry up. It's going to shrink. And it's going to become scratchy. And it becomes totally inadequate to the task that we intended it for. Okay, so we are starting to run out of time. So let me just kind of summarize here, what we covered today, because obviously this is going to go forward into multiple segments. We are talking about pattern recognition in the prophetic process, which is, repeating what we talked about at the beginning of the show. The prophetic process is when God gives you a promise, which is, in reality, it's an invitation. So, like, for example, Abraham was told he was going to have a son, right? Joseph was told in a dream that his brothers would bow down to him. Moses was told that he would deliver the nation of Israel. David was told he would be king of Israel. These are the prophetic promises that these men were given by God. Well, that promise was not simply a promise that would come to pass no matter what. It was an invitation into a promise. It was an invitation onto a journey that would, number one, it would change this perspective, okay? The fallen perspective, okay? And it would repair the breach that we are in vital union with God, or it's available to be in vital union with God. But here's the key, and this is where I'm going to wrap up here. Final statement is that, see, we invent a system. We invent, number one, we actually invent a false persona. We deny who we are. So therefore, what we do is we make up a false persona about who we are. We make up a false persona. I invent a false self that I present to the world because I don't believe that if you really saw me, you'd like me. So I'm going to invent a false persona, right? I'm also going to invent a false narrative. I'm going to invent a false story about who I am and how I am navigating this world, right? I'm going to invent a false plan of action, and then I'm going to attach a false meaning to all of that. That is what humanity does. False persona, false narrative, false action plan, false meaning that we invent so that we try to navigate this thing called life. And that's going to play a critical role in pattern recognition in the prophetic process that we're going to talk more about next week and for weeks to come. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to wrap it up for today. I am out of time. I am Tim Kise. I am host of God Save the King, and I want to thank you for joining me on the Truth Be Told radio network, where you can hear my show every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. God save the King.